All right. All right, thank you everyone for coming to Converge's fourth special speaker series. Our topic today is if you are not using data to drive your people decisions, here is why you should. So Mark Izzo, the CEO of Converge, will be moderating a discussion between our guest speakers, Bruce Marable and Jess Podgajny. So Bruce is the CEO of Employee Cycle. That is a technology that automates HR reporting and the analytics process for small and medium-sized companies. And Jess has a passion for the human, the people side of business. So she has founded a company called Luna, which is a platform created to help design work for life. So I will let Mark take it away from here.
Well, thanks everyone for joining us. Thanks, Anna, for the intro and bios. And thanks for joining us, Bruce and Jess. This should be an interesting dialogue. Look forward to your insights. I know both of your companies have received a lot of press lately, so congratulations on that. I've been following and reading up on that, so that's good news for both of you. So before we dive too deep into this, why don't you both give us a summary of sort of what your organizations do? Jess, why don't you start, and then we'll turn it over to Bruce.
I have to go first? I thought we'd make Bruce go first. All right. Well, thanks everyone for having me here today. I'm Jess Podgajny, co-founder and CEO of Luna. And Luna is essentially a team operating system. We actually call our technology the Team OS for hybrid and remote employers. And what that means is really that employers right now need companies, teams, employers, we all need ways to better operationalize our work in hybrid and remote environments in a way that meets people where they are, understands what people need to be best supported, and our Team OS does that. And we do it by combining two primary parts of the tech. The first is called a POP, or Personal Operating Profile, and it's where employees share information about themselves. It can be about their work style, their work preferences, what they need to be at their best, their skills, even some personal information about maybe people, pets, communities that are important to them. So you can get a sense of that whole person. And then the second part of our tech are these team dashboards. And those dashboards help to visualize the individual preferences of your team, but what it looks like in the aggregate. And it recommends back actions or ways of working so that teams can perform really effectively, quickly in hybrid and remote settings. So we're all about kind of understanding the individual and how to really motivate from there, not just saying, okay, this is what we have to do and let's go execute. We want to kind of think about what people say they want or need to be at their best, and then finding the opportunities to actually work in that way. So thanks for having me, and I'll pass it over to Bruce.
All right, thank you. And thank you for having me and everyone here. Good morning, and hope that you learned something from what we're talking about today. So to give you some quick context about Employee Cycle, we're an HR analytics dashboard, and we pride ourselves on giving HR leaders a real-time, out-of-the-box, beautiful HR dashboard within 15 minutes. The reason why we exist is because CEOs and company leaders always say, employees are their greatest asset, yet it's the area of the business they typically know the least about. And a lot of the times that's true because HR leaders typically lack a lot of the data skills to be able to bring their data to life. And so we connect to the most popular HRIS and other systems from small and medium companies to be able to pull all that data to one real-time centralized HR dashboard. Not only does it allow HR to become more empowered to use the data to proactively understand the trends of the workforce, but it also allows them to create multiple dashboards and share with all the internal and external stakeholders so that this becomes your source of truth.
Excellent. Thanks so much, both of you. Jess, did I hear you say, well, let me ask you this question. In your technology platform, it sounded to me like the employee is actually loading in the data. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, so for a long time, this concept of a personal user manual or some tech techies call it a README file for a person, have been documents that individuals create for themselves to share with other people. This is how I work or how I like to work, and how you can best engage with me at work. And we've essentially taken that concept and digitized it in a way that's both approachable for anyone at any level in the organization and systematic. So it's able to be stitched together in those team dashboards. So the employees are the ones that are answering questions to create this individual profile for themselves that's highly shareable. It's an individual URL they can share with anyone they'd like to share it with. But then that data feeds in to the team dashboards. So employees are sharing what they're comfortable sharing. If you don't want to share your top skills, then don't share your top skills. But we nudge people to encourage more answers and even kind of thinking differently about how they can approach that information. So it is employee led for sure. And truly, we believe that's the best way, because when you're told to do something, the framing and the mindset is completely different from when you're like, okay, this is optional. This is a way for me to convey more about me, and I'm going to share what I'm comfortable sharing.
So how do HR and business leaders then use that data that is employee driven to
Yes.
improve performance, increase engagement, etc.?
Yep. So I'll start with the team level, and then I'll talk about the organization level. At the team level, in a team dashboard, you're visualizing individual preferences of each team member. So everyone's a unique person. They might all have different work styles, different communication styles, different location preferences, all of those things that get fed into the team dashboard. So now as a leader on that team or a member of that team, you're able to understand how other people are preferring to work right now. You're able to see updates as those preferences might change over time. And the insights that our technology serves back help to suggest ways to optimize how you're connecting as a team. And so I think it really starts with the base level of, I now know these people better. I feel more connected to them because I have an understanding of what they're all about. And the research, really evidence tells us that when teams are more connected, they are more productive. There's a greater sense of belonging in general. And so that's really, we're creating the environment to spark those connections, the information to make people feel like they're seen and heard, and then ultimately driving productivity for that team overall. At the organizational level, sorry, let me just cap that off.
No. Yeah, please.
In the aggregate, at that organizational level, you might now see, so one of the questions in the pop is, in the next 6 to 12 months, what is your professional priority? And you might respond there and say, well, it's, and there's choices. We have choices in there. And so you might pick building relationships. Now, at the organizational level, if you can see that 30% of your organization in the next 6 to 12 months wants to focus on building relationships, you take that data and say, how am I going to create the circumstances for that to happen? How am I going to create the opportunities, the environment, the programming to make sure that building relationships can be, if a third of my company wants to focus on this, I know it's important. So, that's the way at the top level, your organizational leadership can take the information and also be tracking how it evolves over time, because there's nothing worse than creating a program that no one actually uses. And you want to be able to take that real-time information and operate quickly. And sometimes it doesn't cost anything. It's just about putting the right circumstances in place.
Great, thank you. Bruce, I heard you mention in your intro something about 15 minutes. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. So our awesome product team has really studied and learned everything we possibly can learn about what's called an API for all the different HR systems out there, specifically for our target market. And we look at our target market being 100 to a few thousand employees. And so the way that it works is, because we have understood the API or the connection to these different HR systems, We understand all the different fields and the types of data that can be pulled out. So we've built a template so that once we pull out that data, once you connect your system, within 15 minutes, we can give you an out-of-the-box dashboard with pre-populated metrics that we find cover 80 to 90% of all the metrics that any HR leader from any industry would care about.
So what are some of those metrics?
Sure. So broad level, we're pulling out metrics and categories around headcount, turnover, retention, diversity, engagement, performance, rewards of recognition, and recruiting. Some of the use cases that people really care about, especially in today's economy, are around promotion velocity. So a lot of HR leaders might not even know that term, but they know that they need to track promotions. And so what you're doing there is making sure that you're tracking, are you promoting people quickly enough? Are you promoting people in the department at all? Are there any discrepancies around who are you promoting from a population cohort standpoint? So are you not promoting women enough as much as you're promoting men, or are there underrepresented people that you're not promoting? And the reason why you really want to track things like promotion velocity is because it's one of those indicators that will show whether or not employees have a perception of upward mobility in your company. So if no one's getting promoted in their specific department, they may think that there's no room to grow here, and that can directly impact your turnover rates, because now you have people that have been there for a specific period of time. They feel like it's their time to shine, it's their time to get promoted, they leave. Not only does it negatively impact that person or that institutional knowledge that you just lost, but now all the other people behind them are thinking, well, if that person was here for a year or two and they left, I'm going to leave too. And so now you have this waterfall effect, all because you weren't promoting people quickly enough. So there's a lot of metrics that we track in these different buckets, but that's just one use case that we find people really need to track today, especially how people are just jumping from job to job for not even just that much more money, maybe 10, 15% more than what they were getting paid before, just because people feel like it's a better opportunity and it's a faster way to get paid versus waiting until somebody finally gets their stuff together to say, oh, hey, maybe you do need to get promoted.
Bruce, and Mark, if you don't mind, I just want to piggyback on something Bruce said. I think really critical in our new normals of hybrid and remote work is also the promotion velocity and differences between your location. So are people who are going into the HQ getting promoted faster than people who are potentially working in a spoke of the office, so to speak? And so tracking that to see, is there unconscious bias in place on the leadership side, is a great opportunity for HR to go and say, we need to train our managers to think differently about how we're leading and promoting. It can't just be the people that are out of sight or truly out of mind. It has to be like focusing on this equitable process, regardless of location, if the company has multiple locations. So I think that's a huge one right now that we need to focus on.
And to your point, Jess, one of the things that some companies have found is because they just can't really kick out that unconscious bias of hiring people that you're buddy with closely. They said, we're not going to do hybrid at all. We're just going to do pure remote to put everybody on equal footing.
Yeah,
because it's
absolutely
too difficult to try to differentiate between whether or not this person got promoted because they go to happy hour with their manager or because they're actually the best fit for the role.
Yep.
Interesting. So talk a little bit more about, let's stay on this topic of hybrid work a little bit, remote work, in terms of data and data collection. Is that a challenge, Bruce, in terms of that data collection with people being hybrid and then ultimately once HR and other leaders get access to the data, making decisions about it? What do you see?
From our standpoint, it actually put a lot more emphasis and impact on the data, because you no longer, for those companies that are either hybrid and or totally remote, it puts a lot more emphasis on the data because they no longer can just look over their shoulder. So no longer can the HR leader just look over their shoulder and say, oh, I know the ethnicity of everyone, or at least I could do best guess, which is a whole nother conversation. Or the HR leader could say, oh, I can clearly see that there were 10 people sitting here and then there's 5. So maybe there's a turnover problem in this pod or in this department or this section where people are sitting. Why is this empty now? Because you no longer have those types of things that you can just look over your shoulder or walk down the hallway and see, it actually puts a lot more emphasis on data. And what we found is that we even see smaller companies caring more about the data before you would traditionally see a company started to care, because that's the only way that they're getting insight. And so when it comes to things like turnover or retention or promotions or DEI, it's much easier, much faster, and much more efficient for you to use the data versus try to have a one-on-one with everyone in the organization and then trying to figure out what's going on. Because by the time they actually give you the data, you've already missed the opportunity to proactively stop the problem.
Got it. Jess, could you follow up on that from Luna's perspective and your technology? Do you see the differences between sort of the remote worker and what they need to be engaged, successful, committed, and so forth, versus those that are now working in the headquarters?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and there's some really good bodies of research out there about this. So we see it in our data. I'll also cite Michael Arena is a PhD who is affiliated with an organization called Connected Commons, and he does a lot of research on connection in general. And one really interesting study he did focused on a 700-person engineering organization. So there was about, let's call it 7 different departments inside this big org. And pre-pandemic, they were really connected. There was kind of all these synapses, and he visualizes it in this really beautiful way. And then 12 months into the pandemic, what he calls the bridging and bonding connections had significantly reduced. So the connections inter-department had reduced by about 30%, and the connections even within a department in that now remote setting had reduced by about 25%. So overall, I think this move to remote and hybrid is the preference. It's what people want, but we need to be conscious of the fact that it is diminishing our networks. Our networks are shrinking. Our ability to feel connected to the culture of an organization needs to be adapted into new ways, and that's why the Team OS that we've built exists. But it's fascinating to kind of see and hear what employees are preferring, yet at the same time they're feeling maybe more isolated than ever before. And to that end, we measure not only what employee-led data for us, like we measure not only what they're answering, but also what they're not answering. So we can isolate on a specific team. Maybe there's not a lot of psychological safety because no one's answering any personal questions or sharing anything about their hobbies or anything outside of work. We can look at maybe there's a shift in an organization. Maybe it was where people were sharing a lot, and then all of a sudden they updated their POP so that it was sharing less. So we're able to see what did you answer, but also what didn't you answer, and are there trends associated with that to make predictive insights for your organization.
Excellent. So Bruce made a quote, a statement when we spoke recently, something to the effect, and forgive me if I get this wrong, Bruce. We have more data and knowledge, and we know more about our clients than we do about our people. Can you sort of further up or follow up on that quote that you made recently?
Sure. So one of the statements that we're always telling all the stakeholders of our company, whether it's investors or customers or partners, is that CEOs and leaders always say that employees are their greatest asset, yet it's the area that they know the least about. So if you ask a CEO of any manufacturing company, tech company, finance company about their customers, what is your revenue? What is the average client or customer paying? What industry are you most focused on? Where are your customers located? You probably know a lot of those answers. Rapid fire, you could just answer them. But we're finding that HR leaders are being asked from their CEOs, how many employees do we have? Just very basic questions. How many employees do we have across the country? What is our diversity? What is our turnover rate? They have no idea. And so it's really this disconnect between, oh, employees are the most important part of our company. We couldn't do anything without our employees. If we didn't have our employees, then our company would just fall apart. Yet, if you're going to call it your asset, well, then you would think that you would want to know more about your most important asset than just, oh, we just have people and they're just bodies. And so what we find is that a lot of HR leaders want to be as data-driven as possible, want to be as proactive as possible, want to come to the quote unquote overused seat at the table to show here's all the things happening with the workforce. But unfortunately, most HR leaders didn't have a business background, didn't have an analytics background. We've heard many HR leaders tell us, I didn't get into HR to build stupid pivot tables. I got into HR to help our workforce thrive, but I know that I need to use data to do it, but I don't necessarily have the chops and the data skills to be able to do this myself.
Got it. Jess, follow up on Bruce's quote. I thought it was insightful.
Yeah, I completely agree. We focus on our customers, even if we say we are people first and all about our people. What I'll share, maybe bringing a little bit of empathy into the HR sphere here is that data can feel and sound intimidating, and when we have a lack of it, it can also feel like we're sort of blindly moving forward, that we just don't have the right path and plan, or we are making assumptions based on gut. But at the end of the day, data is just information, and we have so many information opportunities every single day, and that can be as simple as what HR loves, a conversation with a real person, all the way to a click of a button in 15 minutes, and you have this incredible dashboard on the employee cycle side. So I think it can get really overwhelming really quickly. And my suggestion here would be figure out what the most critical thing to know is, and then figure out how you tackle that first. Because then once you get a taste, oh, wow, I feel like I have a really strong handle on my diversity, then you can move on to the next thing. And then you can move on to the next thing. And at some point you'll be ready for Bruce's full dashboard, or you'll feel like your teams need the Team OS to operate really nimbly. But it can happen in baby steps, because it's information overload in this world that we live in. There's data everywhere, and we need to just figure out how to channel it into the right ways so it's doing good things for our people in addition to our customers.
Yeah, just as a follow-up to that, it's sort of, we're an HR firm and we see our clients collecting KPIs and metrics on operating efficiency, on financial numbers, some logistical issues, supply chain numbers, and maybe turnover, right? But deeper than that, not much. And so, how do we help our organizations, our clients, get more people data driven, so that we can be more of assistance to them, and they can start to have the insights that you were both talking about. So give us some thoughts there.
Sure,
I'll jump in.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, and then Bruce, Deb, I know you're going to have a lot to say here too. I think that the metrics around people are can feel soft, right? So it's sometimes you're like, oh, what engagement, or what's this sentiment that I'm getting? But I would tie it back to the hard numbers. So the cost of losing one employee is anywhere between 50% and 200% of their salary, that one person. So this isn't a line on your P&L, but this is real dollars to an organization. And it's impact. It loses, it helps, it's a ripple effect, basically. It changes morale, because now the people left behind are picking up the slack. It drains managers because they have to spend more time hiring. It is kind of a loss of knowledge for your organization. So there's this ripple effect that happens, and it is a financial blow to the organization. So we need to tie it back to the numbers because the people are driving the numbers and we forget that. So we can look at the supply chain, we can look at the revenue, we can look at the margins, we can look at the number of customers, but ultimately the people in your organization are making all of that happen. And so I think reminding your clients that how can you measure your turnover? What's that? Let's estimate the cost. Let's assume it's 1x of everyone's salary, or how long does it take you to typically rehire, and actually come up with a real number for each person. If you add that up, for most organizations, it's over $1 million, even for very small companies. Sometimes it's tens of millions of dollars that are walking out the door. And then all of a sudden it becomes a priority.
Thank you. Bruce, any additional thoughts there?
Sure. So the way we look at it is two different components. One, where are you in regards to using the data? And then what is the data that you're using? So on the former, we look at the data maturity curve on a framework of 4 different stages. And I think this would be a really interesting and insightful way for your clients to understand where are they, so that you always give them something to look forward to get to the next stage. So for instance, the first stage is just raw data collection. Where are you getting the data from? You just have raw data. Doesn't mean anything, not telling you anything. It's just data. Is that coming from a system, or is that coming from some type of spreadsheet? Either way, it's still data, whether it's automated or it's manually collected. From the data, then you want to go from data to information. So now you're taking this raw data and you're turning that into information in the form of KPIs, bar charts, line graphs, giving you some type of information around trends, point in time, some type of comparison data. So this could look like, what is your turnover rate today? What is your turnover rate 3 months, 6 months, 9 months? What is your first year turnover rate? Really looking at things either point in time or trend. Then you want to get into insights. Insights are actually telling you, oh, I've actually learned something from this trend. I've realized that my marketing department not only has twice as much turnover than any other department, but marketing actually has the biggest percentage of first year turnover. That means that there's some misalignment between the job description and the candidates that are coming in. Maybe they think they're going to do super cool, interactive, forward-thinking marketing, and then they come in and they're designing boring door hangers. Or maybe there's some type of toxicity here. This manager, for some reason, just can't hold on to people for more than 12 months. Maybe there is some type of mismanagement here, or maybe they're just not a good manager. That's where you get your insights. And then the last step is actions. What do I do with that? Now that I know that the marketing team has the highest percentage of turnover and they have the highest percentage of first year turnover, I now need to go talk to this manager and figure out what to do. So the framework that I would set, which I think is pretty self-explanatory, but also really easy to follow, is go from raw data to information to insights to actions. Another way to do this in parallel is to just ask your HR leader or your client, what is one thing? Because if you try to do too many things, they'll get overwhelmed. What is one thing that you really care about that's a goal? And then let's see if we can help you with some data. So a lot of companies care about DEI now. So they may say, if it's a tech company, we want to hire more women in the STEM engineering roles. Okay, great. So let's see, what have you done to do that? Well, we either hired, so your firm, or they worked with some job boards or other organizations that said, we can actually put you in front of a marketplace of women that are interested in engineering, development, data product related roles. All right, so now we could say, all right, so this is what we're going to do. We are now going to track the percentage of hire by gender to see if in fact those sources that you're looking to hire from has actually allowed you to hire more women faster than men in those departments. Or maybe we'll say, maybe it's a candidate pipeline problem. Maybe there's some type of unconscious bias so that when women are getting to a certain stage of the interview process, they are actually leaving, or they're opting out, or they're not making it past. Maybe what you find in the interviewing process is that when you were blinding the resumes and it's a name like Seth, where they didn't know if it was a man or a woman, and they allow that candidate to slide into an in-person interview. But then when they get to an in-person interview and they realize it's a woman, then the candidates don't get past that interview, because now now the conscious bias kicks in because, I didn't know that this was a woman. Now it's a woman. I don't think women are good engineers. And so now they don't make it past that in-person or Zoom interview where I can identify that it's a woman. And so what I would do is work them through the framework, but then also just pick one thing that they care about. Could be DEI, could be turnover, could be headcount planning, and just show them how to use data for that one thing. Once that bug bites them, and like, this is great, we now need to do this across our entire workforce, then you could work it across everything that they're working on.
Got it. So it appears to me, and this is a question for you both, that this data has been available in large organizations for some time. So why and when has it now come downstream to small to mid-sized businesses? And am I accurate, I guess, in my assessment that it's been around in large organizations for some time?
I guess my perspective there, Mark, is that in some, it sort of depends. So for the data in the Team OS, information about employees' work styles and general preferences on where they want to work and when they want to work, their skills, their personal information about them, like that they want to share, like hobbies and whatnot. That information can exist inside big organizations, but what we find is that it's often scattered. It's in multiple places. It's fragmented. It's not able to be reported on. It is often like points in time, and more often than not, it's anonymized. So it's like a survey format where you're saying, if you could, dream, like share your dream, would it be hybrid? Would it be remote? Would it be like, what would it look like? And then it's an anonymous survey. So people are submitting what they would want, but HR is using that then to create a policy. In our situation, it's intentionally personalized. It is being transparent about preferences and styles, but it's not necessarily saying you can have that or you can do that, but it's creating the transparent dialogue for teams and for organizations. So I would say the data can exist and often does exist in big organizations, but in pockets, and it's inconsistent even across the organization. And in small companies, I think what I often see, and having been the chief people officer in a small company, is that you're relying on gut a lot. Like you're like, well, here's my sense of the vibe. Here's my sense of what people actually are wanting. So it is less data driven. It's more just cultural vibe, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's really funny you mentioned that about the surveys, because I see so many small to mid-sized companies doing these various surveys, and what do we do with the data?
Yeah.
And if it's anonymous, so you're not
you don't
putting
really
your finger on the
know. Yeah.
pulse. Right. Yeah.
And my favorite, I'll be the broken record on this until the end of my days probably, but whatever people say they want in a survey is that point in time. That's how they're feeling right then and there. It will change. And it might change in 3 months. It might change in 6 months. It might change in 1 year. But we cannot, as HR leaders, have confidence that that is the final answer. This is a fluid and ongoing journey now. It is going to keep changing, and we need tools that can flex and adapt. And I think we also need a mindset that like this, there isn't a final answer. This is just kind of the next answer, and then we'll evolve it to the next one as the business needs and the employee needs evolve.
Bruce, what's your take on this from employee cycle perspective? I mean, like I said, intuitively, I believe this has been around. This data has been around and available to large organizations for some time, and now it's come downstream and available to the small and mid-sized companies. Is that accurate?
I would say, generally speaking, yes. So there's two different angles I'll just talk about quickly here. One is that every department has their time to shine when it comes to being in a transition of becoming more strategic and using data. So marketing right now, a lot of research shows that marketing has the largest budget for software, but 7-8 years ago, marketing was an afterthought and it was all about sales. And marketing was just this small little cute department that nobody respected because all they did was just do billboards and do cute marketing stuff, and they just sat around and did nothing. Now marketing is the most data-driven department in every company because everything can be tracked, everything is digital. And so HR is going through that same transition where not only are you looking to use data, but because HR is going from HR to chief people officer, or every title having the word people in it, people in culture, people manager, chief people happiness person, whatever the title is, now it's going through its transitional phase of being not only becoming more strategic, but being perceived as strategic. To your other question about enterprises, everything starts in the enterprise. Everything starts big companies and then it trickles down. Whether it's accounting software, before you need a big ERP software, Oracle, SAP, all these big companies were doing big accounting software for big companies, and then you get QuickBooks. Super easy, cheap, fast, user-friendly, small and medium companies. So the data has always been there, not only just for HR, but for all departments. It's just how do you actually get small and medium companies to be able to do any of these things that the enterprise companies can do at a cost-efficient price and in a way that's user-friendly enough for them to do it. So from our perspective, a little different from what Jess is doing. From our perspective and what we're doing, that data has always been there. It's just a matter of how important did you see the data and did you have the ability to be able to do it? And Google famously coined the term people analytics. They started using all this data to figure stuff out. Once they did it, all the other enterprises did it, and then it just trickled down to small and medium companies, so that a lot of HR leaders are trying to use data. Everyone's not as data driven as they need to be, but they see the importance of using data in some way.
Yeah, and I think you make an interesting point, and I'd like both your perspectives on this. In the small and mid-sized organizations, collecting and analyzing this could seem to be a daunting task, right? And so, when you tell me about this, the first thing I think of, and I'm role playing here, is, oh my goodness, I don't have the time or the bandwidth to do this, right? And it sits in disparate systems, and I'm not sure how to pull this all together, and so forth and so on. So I'm just going to ignore it. And is that the state of the current state of small and mid-sized businesses?
I would just say really quickly, the reason why we exist is because we find most HR leaders pulling messy, painful, tedious, and time-consuming spreadsheets. So I've never been on a call where I had to say, so HR leader, before we get into our product, you ever heard of this thing called HR reporting? Maybe you should do it. That doesn't exist today. What happens is HR leaders are trying to do it in some way, some better than others. They're pulling the spreadsheets from all these systems and trying to turn that into some type of dashboard, PowerPoint, visual communication story around the data. Again, some are better than others, but for the most part, we find that small, medium, large companies are trying to pull this data together. And depending on the size of your HR team, or if you actually have someone that knows data, maybe their role as HR analyst, they're sharp enough and they're skilled enough to be able to bring this data together. But for the most part, we find that regardless of what the original source of the data is, because the source could be a system or it could be a spreadsheet, either way, we find HR leaders trying to pull the data together, even if it's just for trying to support a board deck or support a company deck for the CEO, just to show 2 or 3 metrics. There's still some way, somehow pulling spreadsheets together.
Jess, what do you see, especially as a former head of HR?
Yeah, well, what's really interesting is I could almost take exactly what Bruce said and just apply it to the leader role. So any manager of a team or department, the conversations that we have is they're like, I don't know how to accommodate everyone's different preferences or priorities in a distributed working environment. I am sort of like keeping the really good ones are keeping an Excel sheet of some sort and saying, okay, this is what Bruce likes, this is what Anna likes, or this is how Bruce prefers to receive feedback in this manner, and he communicates this way, and Anna's this way and the other way. But it's this feeling of like, I just can't get my arms wrapped around it. I need a tool. And to go back to Bruce's model from earlier, he talked about, you've got your raw data, that becomes information, it turns into an insight, and then it becomes an action. And our technology is kind of pulling that information forward, turning it into either insights or actions for the team overall. But really, we're focused on that manager. How do you lead more effectively, faster? How do you optimize the way your team is working? And that's exactly what HR is trying to do as well. Any people ops person is saying, like, how do I optimize for this? But I need technology to give me that action or give me that insight, because the information, I don't even have enough time to digest it. So technology, the beauty of it is that we can kind of pull it all forward. We can build the algorithms and the logic and the intelligence into the tech to help speed up that process for people.
Let me ask a little bit of a technical question, Jess, of you. When I heard you doing the introduction to Luna, it sounded like there was some HR people are familiar with this stuff, these assessments, predictive index, DISC, etc. Is there some underlying piece of that in your platform? Or talk to me a little bit about that, because that's sort of what I gleaned from what I heard.
Yeah, so we have a section in each individual's POP where they could share what their DISC type is, what their Myers-Briggs type is. They can put that information into their personal operating profile. We are not, I wouldn't consider us a personality assessment. I think there's a lot of merit in them. I am personally certified in DISC. I've done probably all of them over the years. My challenge with them is, it's sort of like this horoscope. You get this like cool, like, oh yeah, that's really me. Like, I feel really good about that. And the POP is basically the flip of it. It's me saying, this is what I'm about. This is what's important to me. And I get to update that regularly. So I can share maybe how things are changing, or right now I'm in this I've got all this personal stuff going on. So I want to kind of dial things back. And you can be transparent about that in the team dashboards. The way that we're compiling insights, making recommendations, the actions, it's based on our user data, our kind of research overall with our own information. But we also triangulate with critical pieces of research in the IO psych space to pull in kind of scientific evidence combined with our own data, what we're seeing with user information, to serve back those insights. So we're based on science for sure, and using user data to make it smarter all the time. But I wouldn't categorize us exactly as a predictive index or DISC profile.
Gotcha. Thank you. Bruce, you used the term people analytics a little bit ago. What's the current state of people analytics in the companies that you're pitching to, talking to, working with?
You struck a nerve there, because there's so many titles around this. There's workforce analytics, HR analytics, people analytics. So the true definition or the distinction between HR analytics and people analytics is that HR analytics is exclusively using HR data, whereas people analytics is combining HR data with business data. And so that's why we don't call ourselves a people analytics company, just for that. We could, and most people wouldn't even realize the difference, but to stay true to the definition, HR analytics is looking at all the data we're looking at, integrating to your HRIS, your ATS, engagement, performance system, bringing in OKRs, bringing in rewards and recognition, maybe employer brand, looking at things like time and attendance, LMS, things that HR typically oversees, and also things that are categorized as part of the HR tech stack. When you go into people analytics, now you're looking at things which we get sometimes asked for around combining HR data with sales data out of Salesforce. And so you need a really sophisticated team to be able to do that, because the state of HR analytics is very immature. When you talked about bigger companies earlier, mid-size to enterprises are really the only companies that have the wherewithal or even understanding of how to do things like that. And so that's really a top of the mid-market enterprise framework where you're looking at things like, let's look at my customer success team, and then let's go to the platform that the customer success team uses and look at how many tickets are they actually converting and how long are they converting to keep the customers happy on the questions that they're asking. And then let me compare the number of customer success people we have along with their turnover to see if in fact, when we lost customer success people, we actually had negative customer responses because we didn't have enough people actually being able to serve all the customer tickets or customer support requests that we have. Or the same thing could happen in sales, really combining sales goals and sales compensation data along with your sales department data to see where did you source certain salespeople from, and then combining their sales commission plan data to see, oh, well, we hired X percentage of salespeople from this source. Those people are the top performing people from the sales team that sell in this industry. And it's a lot, it gets very complex, but you really have to be way past HR analytics for you to even bring in all of that data, because one, your data quality around HR data has to be really high. And you have to have really a serious level of integrity around your HR data to even bring in non-HR data for that all to make sense.
So we work with clients probably between 50 and 500 employees. And you're saying that the state of HR data in those companies, generally speaking, and I'm generalizing here, is not very mature.
Yes.
How do we get there?
Well, I think it was to my point earlier about showing in practice, not just in theory, because we talk about things in theory. Oh, you should be using data to do this. You should be using data to do that. But we all know that the hardest thing to start anything is to start. And so the question is, where do you start? Well, let's just pick one use case. Let's look at promotion velocity, and then let's dig into that. Let's look at recruiting. Are you having a hard time recruiting? All right, well, let's look at where are the sources that you used to get a lot of candidates from. Are those sources still working? Are those sources actually producing enough candidates for you to go from interview stage to actually offer stage? Or are you finding that because of the way the economy is today and people have so many options in your industry, are you getting a lot of people that are not actually accepting the offer? So what is your offer acceptance rate? There's so many things that you could potentially look at to really do a deep dive to solve a specific problem that can start getting you in the habit of using data versus trying to use data for every single use case. So for companies that are barely scratching the surface, my recommendation is pick one use case, one specific problem. I'm not saying recruiting, literally one specific problem in recruiting. Is it a DEI recruiting problem? Is it an offer acceptance rate problem? Is it a problem of time to hire? You're just not hiring people fast enough. Well, let's optimize the hiring process. Maybe you're asking too many questions. Maybe you have too many interview stages. Maybe you're asking too many weird questions and you're just trying to ask people trick questions in the process. I mean, Google found that out. They realized that they were asking people silly questions like, if you were the size of a nickel, how would you jump out of a blender, or whatever questions that they're asking. And then they realized none of that actually mattered. They A/B tested and saw that the people who they didn't ask ridiculous questions actually were just as smart, just as capable, just as skilled and experienced to do the great job. So then they dramatically shortened their hiring process and removed all these ridiculous questions. But they could only see that by looking at what was the time to hire and looking at the time and the conversion rates between all the stages. So I would just pick one very specific focus problem or use case or idea that they're trying to explore, and then use data there. Show how you go from start to finish of raw data, information, insights, actions, and then wash, rinse, repeat across the entire workforce.
That's great insight. Jess, I've been interested to hear your thinking around, being a chief HR officer and then, you saw something that caused you to launch Luna. And what was that? Help us understand what the chief HR officer in you saw or didn't see that caused you to then say, here's a problem that needs to be fixed.
Yes, thanks for asking. So prior to being a chief people officer, I was a management consultant and did a lot of work on what I would call the people side of projects. So often leading big organizational change initiatives inside global companies, launching new product lines, reorging large functions, helping with M&A. Eventually stepped into the CPO seat for the management consultancy that I worked for. And ultimately, I think, the culmination of those experiences exposed to me that the way organizations were approaching talent was very much, here's what it's like to come work here. Do you want to come do all of these things? Like, do you want to fit into our box? And people were leaving, whether it was a client that I had worked with or someone that was working for me, for what I felt like were avoidable reasons. Like they were like, I want more flexibility, or I don't want to work on that kind of project anymore, or I don't know that the development path is available, or, I really wish I could move to part-time for a period of time. Like people's lives evolve and their needs change. And sometimes it's really temporary stuff. And I felt super frustrated that I wasn't able to accommodate all of the personalization, if you will, as part of those departures where I felt like they could have been avoided. And that really set me on a mission to figure out how do we actually know what people want, what they need to work at their best, and how do we make sure that we're keeping up with that in a data-driven way to optimize the way teams can work, optimize the way companies can make investments in talent. And that's how TeamOS came to be.
And I guess that's a major mind shift change for a lot of organizations, right? Because we had a box, we interviewed for the responsibilities in that box, and you either fit into the box or you didn't.
Yeah.
And what you're suggesting is something drastically different.
It is absolutely a mindset change, but I think the pandemic was a major catalyst for this. People are no longer willing to fit into the box, and with the emphasis on diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, we actually know that organizations that aren't looking for the cookie cutter, but are actually looking for unique, diverse talent that are going to bring different perspectives into the organization, those organizations are more profitable, they're more successful long-term, they can grow more effectively. So we need to make the shift. Organizations must make the shift, and many have started to, and I think more will follow suit.
Great. We are running up on the hour, and I'd like to thank our guests for their insights. And before we wrap up, I'd like, if we could, Bruce, could you just give us a quick summary of employee cycle and contact information so that any of our participants here can get in touch with you? And then Jess, I'll turn it over to you and ask you to do the same if you would. So if you would just give us a brief commercial on your organization and also contact information, we can share that with all of our participants.
Sure. If you're either not doing any HR reporting today, or you feel like you're doing it poorly or not doing it as well as you think you could be, and you would like to remove all the pain and suffering and manual HR spreadsheet reporting and really spend all your time on the most important thing, which is solving the human problems and understanding why the data is important, then please reach out to Employee Cycle. If you're using one of the most popular HRIS systems out there, like HiBob, UKG, namely ADP, Sapling, Zenefits, Bamboo HR, Paylocity, Paychex, we integrate to all of them. So we would love to give you a 14-day free trial to see how it goes. And I also want to say that I know we're talking a lot about data here, but we're the first company to tell you that data won't solve all your problems. There's still a lot of strategic things that you need to do. So we always say, just because you have the data doesn't mean that you turn your brain off. you still need to look at the data because sometimes the data can point you in a totally wrong direction. So use the data, but also make sure that you're thinking critically about it. But I can be reached at bruce@employeecycle.com, or you can check us out at employeecycle.com. Thanks.
Thank you, Bruce. Jess?
Yeah, so if you are finding that your managers are feeling stressed out, or you're losing a lot of leadership talent, you feel like your culture isn't as connected as perhaps it once was, and you're working in hybrid or remote environments, then absolutely reach out. We should talk. Would love to help you think through how TeamOS could potentially support your team overall, your organization overall. We are currently running an early access program. It's called the Luminary program for a product update that's coming out in October. So that is free for 2 months and then discounted subscription pricing after that. So if you have an interest in being a part of that program, you can go to our website. It's helloluna.com. L. I'll drop it in the chat here for you as well. And my email is jess@helloluna.com. Also feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn.
Really appreciate that. Thank you so much, Jess and Bruce, for your insights and experiences. And again, congratulations on the recent press that you're both getting, and looking forward to hopefully working together, and continued success to you both. Thanks so much. Thanks
Thank
for your
you
time.
so much. Great to
Thank
be
you.
here.
Sure.
Thank you.
All righty. We're going to wrap up now. Everyone have a great day. Thank you.
Bye,
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye-bye.